Greetings, dear listeners. Before we get started, a reminder to head on over to wisdomofcrowds.live and consider becoming a paying subscriber if you're not one yet. You'll get access to, among other things, the full conversation, as well as other subscriber-only benefits. And don't forget to give us a like and review on your favorite podcast app. With all that out of the way, on to the show. So we're talking about Genocide Joe, or we're talking about genocide more broadly? What are we talking about?
Oh, I forgot about Genocide Joe.
Remember Genocide Joe?
Yeah, I guess more broadly.
I mean, they're related, though, aren't they?
Yeah, I suppose it started under Joe Biden. It's hard for me to think that he was actually our president. Like, there's something about it where it's almost like memory hold. Like, was that really something that we were doing?
Right.
He was really our president. It's kind
Right.
of sad in retrospect because he had some accomplishments, but here we are.
You know what I said to colleagues the other day? Did you see the news when Trump showed up in Saudi Arabia that the king had a mobile McDonald's brought to him?
Yeah, it was a beautiful moment.
And I was just like, Trump is my president. That is what I said at that point.
That was the turning point for you.
That was the turning point for me. That's when Trump became our president. Look, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I think your piece in Wisdom of Crowds, and I believe you've got a related piece coming out in the Washington Post by the time this comes out. Should be out there.
Actually, it won't be, I should say. So people will just have to kind of look forward to that.
Okay, well, look forward to it in the Washington Post next week then when it comes out.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, I feel like in some ways, I don't know, tell me this. Did you write this at least partly because I was provoking you in like 2 episodes about genocide and like, that? Oh, too bad.
No.
I'm not that important. That's too bad.
Yeah, look, I mean, a lot's happened in the past, I think, few weeks, and I'm about to go on book leave for 2 months, so I was thinking about what are the couple final things I want to write before I take my break, and I've just felt the Gaza stuff weighing on me to such a degree. It's actually affected me personally in a way that I wouldn't have imagined. Usually I'm able to separate what's called politics and live a somewhat normal life. I don't try to follow the news very closely. I try to kind of keep my own distance. And I've tried that with Gaza because it pains me to such a degree that I have trouble reading news articles about it because all the updates are just very dire and just unspeakable atrocities that are just being committed, pretty much daily. And it's just hard to take that in. So I think for me, I've had trouble writing about it. I mean, most of my recent columns have not been about Gaza. I mean, they've touched on Gaza in the sense of international students in America and their rights to free speech and due process on Gaza and on pro-Palestinian speech more generally. But I've had trouble writing about Gaza specifically and kind of taking it on squarely because I just find it brings my mood down to such a degree, and I don't even know how to process the information.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand how it's possible that we're even having these conversations. The fact that what I consider to be a genocide is happening in broad daylight with American weapons, with American support, with American aid. That's also somewhat unusual because you had Rwanda, you had Bosnia, but and even Sudan more recently, but those genocides weren't committed with U.S. support. So I think there's also a sense of how are we as Americans complicit in this? How is that even like whoa, that's kind of new, that's distinctive. At least in Bosnia, we were trying to oppose the genocide eventually and fight it. So anyway, that's just kind of like that's sort of where I'm at just in terms of my own thinking now is how is this possible? And you know me, like I'm a moralist at heart.
Right.
It's hard for me to look at things as a hard-headed realist. I'm not like you in that regard.
Yeah.
These things affect me personally. Not to say they don't affect you personally
Well, I
in
mean,
some
personally,
way,
I
but
think personally is a good way to think about it. I
yeah.
want to push on that a bit. Um, look, let's drill down on that a little bit. Because, you mentioned what's happening in Sudan, or what happened in Sudan, but what's happening in Sudan right now, just by raw numbers, dwarfs what's happening in Gaza. I don't know. I don't know
Not
if
in
per
per
capita
capita
it does.
terms, but we don't have to really
No,
get
I mean,
into
I
all
think
that. But
it does come down to counting corpses, which I've before said is a really tasteless thing, which I'm actually why I'm not why moralizing about this stuff doesn't land well with me. Just because I don't know, I feel like um, it's inherently political. I think it always is inherently political, and that's fine. I'm not saying it shouldn't be political, but I think that there's what always sort of gets my back up is that the politics ends up hiding behind number counting of corpses, which is fine. It's a fine political move, but it's also it always makes me feel that there's more going on, and therefore that the pleading is on some level. I don't know. Dishonest sounds too harsh, but it is what I mean. Ultimately, is that it's like it's the fact that it's personal for a lot of people. This kind of stuff when it's happening, and again, like I mean, it was personal in the Balkans too when it was happening, but doesn't mean that it's universal. I guess is really what it comes down to. But let's then talk about it. At least Sudan, it's not U.S. weapons, and that's presumably the thing that guts you most, right? That the U.S. is in some way, you would
facilitating it,
say, party
supporting
to
it,
this,
yeah,
supporting, party to it, really party to it, right?
intimately.
Intimately. Um, and I can follow you. I think in the piece you wrote for us on Wisdom of Crowds, you say that you didn't like using the word genocide because of you felt it was like cutting off conversation, and that if the goal is to persuade and have discourse, which you believe in, that using words like that just like cuts off conversation.
And I also wanted to be sensitive to, you know, Jewish Americans, Jewish friends, colleagues as well. I think that if you're Jewish, when you hear but honestly, more broadly than that, when you hear the word genocide, you automatically think of the Holocaust, and that's understandable. But genocide, as we've alluded to, because we've mentioned a couple other cases, is not just about the Holocaust or just a way to describe the Holocaust. But I think in the popular imagination, there's this sense of genocide with a capital G. And of course, I'm not comparing anything to the Holocaust, which I do think is singular in history. But that's not really how one defines genocide. And what I try to lay out in the piece for Wisdom of Crowds, which we'll include a link to in the show notes, I do hope people take a moment to read it, that the UN Genocide Convention has a pretty clear definition of genocide, which isn't too difficult to follow. And I actually lay down the different constituent elements of it. A big part of it is genocidal intent. And this is why genocide has been difficult to prove historically, and there haven't been that many genocides historically, is because intent is hard to prove. But the thing with Israel's war in Gaza is that they've said the quiet part out loud. That's somewhat remarkable, actually, that you have senior Israeli ministers who are in the cabinet, including in the war cabinet, including some of Netanyahu's own statements, where they're actually quite clear about their intent to destroy Gaza, to leave it, as one minister put it, totally destroyed. The definition, one part of the definition in the convention is, quote, to deliberately inflict on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. It's that's kind of legally, it sounds, it's not like the most concise way of putting things, but it's about destroying a people, destroying a group, making their conditions unbearable. But an important part of it is killing members of the group. So it can't just be ethnic cleansing in the sense of just forcing people to move from one territory to another. That's more common in history. And that's actually a big part of what happened in the founding of new states in Europe and elsewhere. One might even argue part of the state building process is that you try to have a more homogenous group, and the people who threaten that homogeneity have to be pushed out or are pushed out. What genocide has to include is the physical destruction of part of a group, killing large members of a group. And this is also where we have some new data, which is really shocking. And it's not just in fringe reports or fringe sources, but The Economist, not exactly known as a font of pro-Palestine sentiment, recently had a report on this that new research suggests that as many as 109,000 Palestinians have been killed directly by Israel. This doesn't even include indirect causes of death. So that's actually more than double the Gaza Ministry of Health's own counts. And, people will say, and it is true, that's the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health. So people have always called into question those numbers, which are about 53,000. But the fact that you have independent sources, it's drawing on a study in The Lancet that suggests the number could be a lot higher for the simple reason that hospitals in Gaza can't keep up updated counts. So it's becoming more mainstream, these revised counts, which are a lot higher. And it's the remarkable part, and I don't mean, it's just hard. I'm even as I talk to you right now, Damir, I'm like, wait, is this really real? Is that 109,000 out of 2 to 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza? That's the pre-war population. That means that as much as 5% of the entire pre-war population has been killed. That would be analogous to 17 million Americans.
Right.
And what I pose in the piece, and I think that people should just consider this, if a foreign country killed 17 million of our fellow Americans, I don't think we would be having a legalistic conversation about, all this pearl clutching, is a genocide or not. I think we as Americans would say, yes, a genocide is being committed against us.
So, look, what I don't want to do is actually litigate the case.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to put out
I wanted you to lay out
it.
the stuff, but I think there's more interesting things to talk about there. I'll just point out that I think everyone is citing The Economist, but as you said, it's The Lancet. It's not The Economist, and The Lancet. It's a bit of a bugaboo among people on the right that they are political and have been politicized. That said, I did look into the study, and it does use sort of normal epidemiological sort of approaches to calculating things. It's not out of the mainstream. It should be said that there are upper and lower bounds. 109,000 is the upper bound of their study, and there's certainly uncertainty around it. If I remember correctly, they took 2 cohorts of figures. We're using sort of social media surveys, and I mean, it sounds like a pretty detailed study of trying to track these things. But also,
the lower bound was 77,000. Just so people are aware, the lower bound 77,000, which is still obviously a lot more.
Lower bound certainly higher than the official reported thing. I think it's probably fair to say that it's going to be higher than 50,000 or whatever it is. But just, I want to throw out all the sort of things that I think people would want thrown out here. But I think what struck me in your piece is exactly what you ended your comments on right now, which is that if what did you say, 17%
So 5% of the population,
Okay,
which
about 17 million, right? If 5% of the American population was
17
killed by a
million.
foreign power, we would not be talking about whether it's genocide or not. We'll be fucking killing the motherfuckers on the other side of that. We would not be going to international law and negotiating the question of genocide, which to me,
well, if a
like,
foreign
gets at
country was capable of killing 17
Man,
million
of
Americans,
course.
presumably it would be in a different context in which the U.S. wasn't as powerful.
But again, this gets to the very, like, my core conviction. I mean, I think it's a perfect way to sort of get at the first principle thing that we like to kick around here in Wisdom of Crowds. This is fundamentally why I think, like, the very category of genocide and international law is not terribly useful. Because it implies, I mean, I think by even your little scenario there where you're like, America, would demand that this be recognized as a genocide. If you are weak and demanding that it be recognized, by whom? The international community, the world, in order to do what? Help you? This is, to me, like, it really delineates the absurdity of all of this. And I just go back to the, that essay I wrote after October 7th about Hamas being like the revolutionary leaders of the Palestinian cause right now. They have no illusions about what it takes to make a Palestinian state. It needs to be founded on the blood of Israelis and on the deterrence of Israel being able to attack Palestine, the state, basically. And that deterrence will come through force of arms, as it does for any state. Any state, like, exists because other states are too scared to, like, go attack it. No state is, born at the goodwill and forbearance and, the decision of some mythical international community. It just doesn't happen. It's not the case that these things emerge that way. And so the thing that like the miscalculation of Hamas is that, like I think many Palestinian national liberation movements before it, they thought that the international community of some sort would come to their aid at some point, and, this would be just a raiding party that would inflict pain on Israel, and then Israel would be restrained. It turns out, no. This time, like, a grotesque miscalculation. However, as you count bodies and the rest of it, there was another thing, I don't know where I read it. It was, I think, in the New York Times recently, said that pre-October 7th strength of Hamas fighters, like actual fighters, estimated at around maybe 20,000, or maybe it was more.
I think 20 to 30,000 are some of the estimates.
But Israeli intelligence assessments of Hamas strength right now, today, 20,000. Therefore, again, like, from Hamas's own standpoint, and I would argue, again, I don't know, it's hard to tell what politics
inside Gaza. Is that true, though, that the Israeli estimate is 20,000 still Hamas fighters?
I saw that in I'll dig it up and try and stick it in the show notes. It shouldn't be too hard to find.
They might have incentives to exaggerate that number, because then they can justify the war continuing, to say that many more have to be killed and so forth.
Well, fine.
But keep in mind, they've also said that 20,000 Hamas fighters have already been killed.
So assume
that would
that's...
mean that 20,000 more have been recruited, which I'd be a little bit skeptical about, but who knows at this point.
But assume again, all numbers in this thing are going to be hazy. But I think you and I would agree, and I know you and I did agree, that the idea of eradicating Hamas is not a realistic war goal for this very reason. Actually, this war is a pretty good recruiting tool. The population of Gaza is very young. Lots of angry young men now there, inspired, I would say, by this war to continue the fight. And so, I come back to, I feel your anguish from the side of, like, we're America, we shouldn't be doing this. Though I'm happy to talk about why I think we're giving us way too much credit. But it's on the standpoint of, like, the reality of this conflict. I'm not sure that anyone in Hamas regrets the sacrifices that the Palestinian people are making for this, because their worldview at this point is one of, like, this is how we build the state. And insofar as they're relying on the international community to bail them out, that's a really bad bet. I think the Israelis get this too, and this is like a war of trying to decimate Hamas. Ultimately, I mean, that's still how I view it. I think a lot of people have been killed. I arguing whether it's a genocide or not. I don't really want to negotiate that,
Yeah,
but like
sure.
let's even grant it to you by some definition of international law, which I just think is generally useless. Yeah, maybe it applies.
Okay, well,
but
let me-
anyway, so
so-
that's a lot to throw at you.
Yeah, sure.
Take
sure,
it from
yeah.
wherever.
So look, you ask what is the point of it, and I think I'd say, if nothing else, for posterity, that history matters and how we remember history matters. Now, the fact that decades later we consider what happened in Bosnia to be a genocide, that is relevant. That is something that has gone mainstream.
Yeah. How is it relevant, though?
It's relevant in the sense that it's remembered as such.
Right. So there's I know a guy who runs the Srebrenica Memorial in Bosnia. I haven't actually been, but so
yeah,
it
but
exists.
victims want recognition for what happened to them and their families. I mean, that's a very normal thing, that you want there to be some kind of acknowledgement of what happened. This is the part of any kind of transitional justice, that something has to be, there has to be an admission. And you might say, well, that's all emotional, that's cathartic,
to do what,
whatever
though?
it might be.
Transitional justice to do what? Transitional justice to state formation. What are we talking about?
Well, I think Bosnian national identity, you know more than me on this, is intimately tied to the fact of genocide. That is part of Bosnian identity.
Hasn't done it much good, I would say, is the main thing.
But at least the crime is acknowledged. So you could say the same thing for the Holocaust. The Holocaust wasn't stopped, was it?
No.
Does that mean that it's not useful to say that it was the Holocaust? No, I think there's some use in that. Now, the lessons haven't been learned. I think that the idea of having this memorialization is that we know not to do it again.
Do we?
That there is some kind. I mean, that's the idea behind it.
Yeah, I think I would challenge that. Like, I think that is the
idea,
core flawed idea. There,
okay, but
that,
whether or not never again is true is a different thing. I'm just saying that the idea is that there should be a never again. That's an aspiration. Now, oftentimes aspirations remain unmet. That doesn't mean the aspiration is invalid. We always have aspirations that are unmet, right?
The reason I say it's invalid is I think it leads to a very stupid form of politics, which is, again, this kind of like basically a politics of aspiration of human improvement, as opposed to a politics of like, let's look at what's happening and what's to be done. This gets back to what I was saying about Hamas as like a proper revolutionary movement at the helm of the Palestinian cause, whereas everything else the Palestinians have done before this, maybe since Arafat's death, has been just basically technocratic muling and hoping to be recognized at some point through international pressure.
But it's not like Hamas's approach is. You're saying that Hamas.
I'm not saying it's working. I think they miscalculated badly. I'm just saying
but you're saying that you have some respect for the idea that violence is what makes a state. But clearly, I don't see the Palestinians as particularly closer to having a state as a result of what Hamas did on October 7th. So I don't.
Yeah, they fucked up.
I don't think your argument about power and violence really holds here either.
Why?
Well, because you have a group, Hamas, that did try to use the kinds of tools that you're more sympathetic to.
Yep.
You believe that. You believe that politics depends on violence. That's one of your core premises.
Correct.
That doesn't seem to have been effective in this case.
Because they grossly misjudged basically what the reaction would be. I mean, I think they still counted on having some sort of backstop. And look...
But there could have been we've debated this before. I mean, if we had a different U.S. administration that saw this differently, that had more sympathy towards the Palestinians, that wasn't reflexively ideologically committed to Israel and everything that Israel does, especially under the Biden administration, it's possible to imagine an alternative universe where there would have been policymakers who would have cut off Israel's supplies of advanced weaponry, that wouldn't have provided logistical support, that wouldn't have sent emergency munitions that Israel needed to prosecute the war at key moments. So of course I believe that power is the relevant metric here. And part of what I've been doing and many others have been doing over the past year and a half is making the argument that the US should use its power to prevent Israel from committing atrocities. That's a power argument.
Yeah, yeah. No, again, that's the part that like I grant you. It's where you reach beyond that for universals. That's why I was pointing out to this idea that I'm not sympathetic to the version of the argument where America losing 5% of its population starts moaning about genocide. I think,
but we'd want it. Okay, but Damir, you can see how we as Americans would want it to be recognized as such.
No, I think that
you don't think the
proper response of Americans would be to inflict double or more damage to those that did it to us, and that's appropriate.
Again, okay,
that's appropriate. Like recognition.
Let's say we were the weaker party, Damir.
And so look,
and that we weren't able to retaliate at that level.
The point of being the weaker party is that you have to admit that there is no recourse beyond like the actual reality. This is why I think this is what I'm getting at. The politics of international law and international morals and claims to these things leads to dumb shit. That's really what I'm getting at. It leads to bad politics and dumb claims like this kind of that what we as Americans really need at that point when 5% of us have been killed is recognition by the world.
If we can't have anything else, if we weren't able to defend ourselves, if we weren't able to fight back, that would be better than nothing.
Oh,
and it's worth noting that recognizing it as the Holocaust did actually lead to things that happened subsequently. Certainly from an Israeli perspective, Israel was founded partly as a response to a genocide. So it can have tangible outcomes, whether or not we like those outcomes or not. But from an Israeli perspective, that would be seen as positive. They were able to form a state because there was and have support from the international community because there was a broad recognition that something tragic and horrific had happened to the Jewish people.
That's a bit of a canned history of the foundation of Israel. It's hardly a project that sprouted very partly, I would say. And I think if you asked any Israelis, they'd said we'd had this state no matter what. We'd been working on it for decades before. And, basically they fought a war in order to found it. It wasn't granted to them on a silver platter by the international community. They fought their way to the state.
But if there wasn't a Holocaust, there would have been less urgency to found it in the way that they founded it. I mean, the fact that it happened
The project started before the Holocaust.
Yeah, but it intensified after the Holocaust. I mean, Israel was founded 3 years after World War II ended.
And required a war. Yeah, I mean, again, let's not mince words here. It required a war. There was like the Israeli war to establish itself. It wasn't the beneficence of the international community that was just like, here you go. This is your recompense for the crimes that were done for you. That's just like weird anti-history there. But anyway, look, I do want to then push on some other stuff, but I just want to note, in sort of getting ready to talk to you, I went and let me see if I can pull it up now without blowing up my my computer here. I was looking at the sort of background of the last time that, I don't know if it's exactly comparable, but at least it gets at the thing that bugs you most, which is American complicity in this. And it's basically the Pakistan-Bangladesh war, basically, which was really nasty and was, basically undertaken with pretty strong tacit support from Kissinger and Nixon on this. And I just wanted to cite, it was just in this article by Pankaj Mishra, that was I think in 2011 or 2012 in the New Yorker. It's called Unholy Alliances. But it just has just some choice quotes that he dug up from famously from Nixon, who's like to talk salty about this sort of stuff. I'll just read this one passage because I think it's indicative. Public opinion had also been shifting against West Pakistan, that is to say, today's Pakistan. In June, a report by an intrepid Pakistani journalist named Anthony Mascarenhas had appeared in London's Sunday Times with the headline Genocide. Edward Kennedy returned from a visit to the refugee camps in August, hailing India's way of compassion. That same month, a concert in New York in support of Bangladesh, organized by George Harris and Ravi Shankar, directed the countercultural energies of the 1960s to a new cause. Nixon, however, put his faith in the proverbial American indifference to foreign affairs. Quote, Biafra stirred up a few Catholics, but, I think Biafra stirred up people more than Pakistan, because Pakistan, they're just a bunch of brown goddamn Muslims. That's Nixon for you, and I guess not surprising to anyone who knows anything about about Nixon.
Yeah, but he's right. That's bad.
But he's right.
He's right.
And, he's right about. Well, it's right in the sense that but no one today even remembers the Pakistan-Bangladesh thing. Like, you need to be a specialist, to actually
trust
dig
me,
up this stuff.
They're going to remember Gaza and Palestine.
Will they?
I mean, what are we, 7 decades into the conflict, and it's still top on our headlines? That says something about the resilience of this as an ongoing issue, and I don't really see how recent events will change that. If anything, they'll intensify it. I mean, it's
as an issue for sure, but as moral culpability, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Because
here's what I'd say. I think that the Nixon quote actually gets at something really important. The problem here is American indifference, and if I and others can help make the case in the public conversation that we shouldn't be indifferent, because that's the only way that we can address Nixon's comment. I mean, his comment is that Americans don't care about brown Muslims.
Yeah.
So then we have to get them to care about brown Muslims, and we have to look into the reasons why. Why don't Americans care as much about people who are Muslim, Arab, and or brown? Let's kind of get at the bottom of that. Is there some kind of racism? Is there some kind of dehumanization that's going on here? That's something we discussed at length in our episode with Matt Duss.
Yeah.
And I'd encourage folks to go back and listen to that. We'll include a link in the show notes. But so I don't see how the Nixon quote really supports your case, Damir. I think the Nixon quote gets at something really important, that things have to be recognized before action is possible. If they're dismissed as irrelevant, or they're dismissed as just a bunch of brown people being killed, then of course there won't be action. So let's stop viewing it that way and view it differently.
I mean, again, I think that what it really boils down to, and again, it's sort of thinking about this stuff and getting ready to talk to you about it, is that from the standpoint of activism, if that's what you want to do, obviously, by all means, go forth. It's that when I am going to talk to an activist, I will grant all of this sort of the importance of raising pangs of guilt in order to change political outcomes in a democracy. Yeah. But beyond that, I will question all the rest of it. Basically, what are, if what you're trying to achieve basically is just to sort of, pull on heartstrings, and use these sorts of claims to universal humanhood to stir the Colossus, the United States, to go do your preferred policy abroad, okay, fine. I'm happy to talk about it that way. I know that talking about it that way undermines the very essence of the activists' pitch to voters. Well, look, so I know it's a difficult conversation to have.
I would take issue with the word activism that you keep on using.
Why?
Because all I'm saying is that I have a preferred position and outcome. Mm-hmm. I want things to be other than what they are.
Yeah.
And that I want to use my platform and my writing to persuade people to consider my viewpoint.
Yeah.
That just seems to me writing. That's what we all do. And I think it's a little bit of a bait and switch. I think that you see conversations of power as not being activism. What you argue for isn't activism, but what Shadi argues for is activism. Well, and I think there's a bit of a I don't think
No,
you're being consistent here because you have preferred outcomes too. They're just not moral outcomes, but they are
well,
outcomes.
I mean, like I said, I'll encourage readers to go look at the Mishra essay because it's very good. Because I think it actually bridges exactly what you're talking about. And the reason why he bridges it is that he spends a good amount of time focusing on the massacres in Bangladesh. Lays out, I think, very tidily how it got there, lays out the background of the Cold War, and then spends a good amount of time shining a bright light on, the monstrosity of Nixon and Kissinger in their, well documented audio tape, transcripts. So there's plenty of that stuff in there. But the piece then ends by querying the very question of the possibility of any kind of concept of international justice by pointing out that no one really comes out. Even the Indians who in the end intervened to stop this are doing it for actually pretty grubby reasons, even though Indira Gandhi goes and shows up in the United States and does a bunch of, heartstring pulling antagonizing and appealing to sort of basically liberals at the time. The logic of India's intervention has to do with being destabilized by these flows and worried about war spilling out over there. India itself, is violently putting down all sorts of insurrections on its borders, and then of course, the opposition to the military in Pakistan itself is like, oh yes, that's horrible what they did there. They went too far, but no real sense of that war should have been avoided completely. And then Mishra points out very tidily that it was Bhutto, Benazir's father or whatever predecessor, who is making these claims about excess in killing, and then in his own time engages in very violent repression in Pakistan's own west. So look, the point that Mishra ends up, I think, doing there, what I would prefer is he doesn't flinch from saying these are horrific, nasty, ugly things that are happening. But then he zooms out and says there are no fucking heroes in any of this, and this is a fallen world. And I think that, if you want to call that activism, that, my preferred outcome is a fallen world, I mean, I guess that's true. My preferred outcome is that people recognize the world is fallen, and therefore fundamentally
For what end, though?
irredeemable.
I mean, why? Why? Okay, fine. The world is irredeemable. Then what?
Then what? So then you engage in activism for your narrow political sort of reasons.
No, I'm asking you, Damir. What about what? It? So you persuade more people that the world is irredeemable. Then what?
And so then here's where I want this conversation to end up. I'm really curious to see what happens with Trump on all of this. I'm really, really curious. And if something we've seen a lot of tectonic plate shifting stuff occur in the Middle East this week. Not that huge ultimately, but pretty big, right? Like lifting sanctions on Syria. He meets a former Al-Qaeda guy. Lots of investment and deals with the Saudis. Murky stuff, some of it. Iran, potentially. We'll see what happens with that. Maybe by the time this thing goes live, we'll have more information on Iran. So we're recording on Friday, just so people know. And he's making noises about Gaza again. I saw some clips just this morning. Again, he's like, we have to look at this. Many people are dying. This is terrible. And it's just worth noting that if any of this happens, it'll happen because Trump does not give a fuck about activists, about the international community, about any of the infrastructure about human rights. None of it is going to have mattered. In fact, he is hostile to most of it. And in fact, he is in the process through executive order. I had to look this up because I hadn't been following very closely. Even though the bill in Congress to sanction the ICC fell in cloture in Senate, there's an executive order targeting Karim Khan for all of this stuff. There's no desire to actually, on the part of this administration, to give any credence. And I think it's correct, quite frankly. Very correct. Any sort of power and an inch to these institutions that try and create an international consciousness. And yet you might have an emperor that'll be able to do it for you. I don't know if that's my preferred outcome. It just seems like the kind of outcome that will have an effect as opposed to bleeding hearts. That's my
yeah.
my
But
main
what is
argument.
moving you? But I feel like Damir, in your remark, you've sort of undermined your case a little bit because Trump is being moved to this because he is seeing that there is a lot of killing and starvation. Things are getting really bad. And he seems to be affected by that because he said so specifically. And he's made remarks to this effect many times about how almost all of Gaza is destroyed. There's barely a single building left standing, so on and so forth. So the fact that he's paying more attention to this, I think, is a result of the fact that there is a growing consensus around the fact that Israel is crossing new lines after having crossed many before, and that there is greater pressure, including from the people that Trump talks to when he's on this trip, when he's talking to interlocutors in various countries in the Middle East. I mean, Trump doesn't exist in a vacuum. He is part of a broader discourse. So if the discourse is shifting, if public opinion internationally is shifting to be even more concerned about Israel's excess, then Trump is a product of that world that is being shaped by this public opinion shift.
I'd be shocked if the Saudis, behind closed doors, like talk to him about dead children. And I think that like if they did, it was, like it's destabilizing for us to a certain extent. But there's no, better than me that none of these regimes that he's talking to actually give a shit about Palestinian like body counts and genocide, right?
But clearly Trump has gotten a sense that a lot of people are being killed.
Well, so
somehow
I guess
that's gotten to
I guess
him.
my intuition here, we'll see where it ends up, is that like whatever Trump is able to pull off and or cook up for this won't look anything like what like international justice demands. I
Look, I'll just take a stop to the killing at this point. I don't at some point that's really what this comes down to. How do we stop the killing?
Okay. So I mean, I think that's sort of what I'd like to like push you on this. I mean, you said before, and I feel like you're coming around to this more, and this is why I started with Genocide Joe on this, because there is something to the fact that in Trump in his lack of actual any deference to any kind of policy process, in his incredible self-confidence, in his personalization of everything, where he clearly is irritated and disgusted with Bibi Netanyahu, not even necessarily for the killing, but for not listening to him, basically, right? He's just like, I fucking told you don't do this. It's not like, and he's disobedient. So, you know what I mean? Like, what do you think? Is Trump good? Like, is Trump, like, what's happening in the Middle East right now is the fact that he is unconstrained by mores, norms, and policy process.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Just because he's stopping the killing? Like, this is all great.
No,
right?
no, there's a whole list of things. And
Yeah.
I'll just...
Talk to me about that a little bit.
A
as
few
we
days
sort of,
ago,
yeah.
and it got some attention on the Twitters. Matt Iglesias responded, and we've had a little back and forth on that, which we can include in the show notes. But basically, I said a few days ago, I said this: it pains me to say, but I'm wondering if I was wrong that Kamala Harris would have been better than Trump on the Middle East. I think there's a real lesson here on how Democrats became so remarkably bad on foreign policy that Trump could eclipse them so quickly and so easily. And here are the reasons behind that. The biggest one for me is not actually about Gaza, it's about Syria sanctions relief.
Yeah.
I don't think Kamala would have done that because that Republicans would have attacked her as being too soft, meeting with a former Al-Qaeda leader. Trump doesn't care about any of that, and he's not constrained by those kinds of normal blob considerations. And what that means in practice is that at least one country in the region now has a fighting chance. And I'll take that. That's a big deal. That's not a small thing for me. And also, it means that with Trump's public support of Syria, it's less likely that Israel will try to decapitate the Syrian government.
Yeah.
And that's actually something that Israel seems like it was trying to do.
Right, right.
It was launching airstrikes and so on and so forth against Syria. So I think that that by itself is huge. Sidelining, as you said, Netanyahu is a big one. And I think as hard as it is for us Democrats to acknowledge, the Democratic Party's position on Israel, and here I mean the leadership of the Democratic Party, is that there should be no daylight between Israel and the U.S. And Biden said that explicitly. There was actually a report recently about how Biden told Kamala Harris, the one thing you do, Kamala, no daylight. So it's hard for me to see how a Biden or Harris administration would have actually gotten to where Trump is today. Trump doesn't care about daylight. Trump is acknowledging out in the open that there is daylight. And Trump doesn't seem to care because Trump has no real ideological commitment to Israel.
Right. Right. He's
and
America
that
first.
Gives him more room for maneuver.
But
that
it's
Democrats
important.
wouldn't have had.
But it's important to note, right? Again, though, Trump is also, in many ways, my ideal foreign policy president. You know, like I think he's doesn't study enough, but like actually he understands power more than anything. And I just, you know, it's like, and before that it was Obama. I want to note, like Obama was my other like preferred foreign policy president, who I think made some bad calls. But the fact that he understood the world that way, you know, is very appealing to me. And it runs like 180 degrees into the genocide claim, basically, because my prediction again is that kind of like we'll see what happens with Greenland as well. You know, maybe nothing. But like he's got a vision for it. And I think he's outlined his vision for Gaza as well. It's some sort of redevelopment project, which involves the displacement of all the existing Palestinians,
not
probably
all.
to Sinai or somewhere else.
Okay, but
whatever. It'll be something that will not be acceptable within international law and norms. What he's getting at.
I don't know.
I'm guessing though that like when push comes to shove, it'll
there's no
look something
option.
like
Where
that.
do you put 1.9?
Absolutely agree, Shadi. But I just want you to acknowledge that. I want you to acknowledge that the norms here are a problem, and he's going to trample them. And so appealing to international norms and the good is also, I think, just useless. That's all.
You apparently don't think that U.S. public opinion matters, and you're talking about it in a very narrow sense of what Trump does in the next few days, weeks, or months. But this is a longer struggle.
Okay.
This is a longer fight for American public opinion and shifting one of the two major parties in a more pro-Palestine direction. And already we've seen major, I think, inroads in that direction, in the sense that 75% of Democrats now say that they disapprove of Israel's handling of the war. And its overall conduct against the Palestinians. And the fact that a majority of Democrats want to suspend arms shipments to Israel. The fact that now a majority of Democrats are more sympathetic to Palestinians than they are to Israel, which is a massive shift in just the span of about 10 years. It's really remarkable. No one would have ever imagined this kind of shift in public opinion among Democrats, and we're not talking just about the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, we're talking about Democrats more broadly. That, to me, is a major win that will have policy implications. Maybe not right away, maybe not in 2 years or 3 years, but in 10 or 15 or 20. And I don't think, there's a real chance this might not be resolved, that there might not be any kind of peace settlement in the coming years. So we do have to think about the medium to longer term prospects here.
I agree it won't be resolved. I think nothing that Trump achieves will be resolved. But again, what I like about Trump in foreign policy is that I don't think there's a conceit that he's solving problems forever. He's always sort of, nudging, pushing, and seeing what he can get
with the idea of just, solve the near-term problems and then keep working on them into the future. And I guess the other part that's, appealing to me about Trump, and I just want to draw the distinction here. I take your point. You're fighting for the heart of the Democratic Party. Fine. Not my fight. Don't really care. What I really like about Trump, though, is that his policy, maybe putting daylight between him and Israel, or the United States and Israel, which I think is absolutely fine. But he's certainly not pro-Palestinian. I think that was a tell there of like your thing. The ideal policy is one of like actually the United States not like having that much emotional attachment to any country. I think that is the best outcome, and that is a great corrective that Trump is sort of injecting into the body politic. Is just like, let's stop talking about these things as, we're superheroes. This is a huge grand moral play, and we need to be like improving the world for the good. It's a nasty, messy, gray space. We're very powerful, and if we're, I think, led astray into trying to, bring salvation on this planet. And I guess this is what I mean by when you're challenging me earlier here about a fallen world. I do think that like a narrower, much more pragmatic, and call it problem-solving approach to foreign policy is better, certainly in an era when we're not going to be hegemons. We're not going to be hegemons.
Why is it better, Damir? What are your preferred outcomes? Like, what do you stand for at the end of the day? What do you want to happen? At the end of the day,
I don't stand for anything because I don't think anything gets solved. I think, like, basically you look at anything.
Okay, well, there we go. You've said... Like,
so basically, you're like, I do think that what he's trying to do in Ukraine, as unsavory it is for the Ukrainians, is probably, one way to like nudge this. There are two ways to do it. It's like keep funneling arms into this fight because the Ukrainians are just and everything else, which is again what you would have gotten under Kamala Harris for, we let them fight for forever. I do think that moralizing about that does blind you to like different aspects of the thing. Now it's fine. If you want to politically say we have a moral crusade here and you win that democratically and you're going to like endlessly keep this going, it's fine. I think it occludes certain other things analytically that you need to look at.
But at the end of the day,
as you know, I am empathetic to the Ukrainian cause for Balkan reasons, which is why like our friend Santi loves to bring up some essay I wrote for Wisdom of Crowds talking about the Bucha massacre in Bosnia and the rest of that. That does not mean that like my preferred outcome is justice. You know what I mean?
What are your preferred outcomes?
Don't really have any is really what it comes down to on any of this stuff. Like I'm interested in working these things through and out, and I don't think
for what
that they're...
end? Why?
I don't know. It's interesting. It's like it's playing with power. It's why we're in D.C. Not to make a just world. I know a lot of young people come
Forget
to this town
about a just world. I'm
that.
just talking about something much more narrow, which is simply preferred outcomes.
Which one? Where? Ask me a question. What's preferred outcomes?
I don't know. Like on anything having to do with foreign policy. Like what do you stand for on? Like what do you want to see happen?
I don't really, honestly, I do want America to do well because I'm from here now. Like, if I was in Croatia, I would have liked to see, like, yeah, I guess, like, again, boil it down. America first is not a bad sort of slogan to way to talk about foreign policy.
Do well in what sense?
What do you mean? What sense?
But that's very vague. You want America to do well.
I think that the way Trump is doing it, like becoming more transactional, is a very interesting approach. I don't know how it's going to work out. I'm wary of the shredding of existing alliances. I do think that our alliances have become too ossified, I guess, is really what it comes down to, and reified as some like good in and of itself. I'm suspicious when everyone invokes a good in and of itself. I'm generally a negative person, Shadi. Like I can tell you what I don't like. I'm not like wired to like give you soaring things like this is the policy. Ask me something narrow. Like, I think
presumably you don't like killing?
No, I mean, I don't think that's right. I think like anyone who says that like violence must be somehow, I don't know, beyond the pale is wrong. It's a means of statecraft, absolutely. So no. It's, you make the case.
But presumably you're against killing people without cause.
What's cause?
Okay. Presumably you're against killing innocent civilians.
What's it? No, I'm not against the firebombing of Dresden. No, I'm not against nuking Japan. No.
Because you felt that those things were necessary for an outcome that you preferred.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe, I guess it's an interesting. I am very intrigued by the argument of whether we should have invaded the Japanese islands as opposed to nuking two cities. I think it's interesting.
So okay.
Because and it's interesting because the scale of slaughter on the road not taken, arguably as big if not greater. Just we would have inflicted more pain on ourselves on it. I just think that's a really interesting, moral question that I don't have an answer to. I don't have an answer to.
Like this isn't.
Ultimately, I'm glad we beat Japan. I'm glad. And not because Japan was evil, but because we were at war with them. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's really what it comes down to. Like, we're at war with someone, and then so you get to questions about, like, Israel-Palestine. I don't have a very strong sense of it. I mean, I find it fascinating. When you and I were on that trip, that was my first time and only time in the Middle East. I am very much an ignoramus about it. I found it absolutely gripping, the whole thing. And I didn't walk away feeling that the righteous victims, the Palestinians, or the righteous misunderstood Israelis. I walked away with an appreciation of just like how fucked up it there is, with no sense of how it should work out.
Okay,
and if you remember what I wrote at the time was basically to say all of the optimism of the end of the Cold War led to a bunch of like policy ideas about Israel-Palestine which are collapsing before our eyes. I didn't say anything more than that, except the death of idealism was clearly apparent at that point.
But Damir, this isn't a game or an intellectual exercise, which is, I think, it sounds to you like you enjoy the intellectual aspects of it. I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, but people's lives are implicated in the decisions policymakers make. There's no way to abstract it into an academic exercise. Like, at some level, this matters for people, and those lives can be understood and measured tangibly.
Sure.
So I'm just saying that I think there's something a little bit, I'll just say like a little bit unsettling to me that it can be reduced to an academic or intellectual exercise.
Or a policy exercise, but a policy exercise that rejects the idea that you're going to that through moral will you're going to like basically stop politics, which involves slaughter on the international scale. Basically, is what it comes down to. That human beings are necessarily the cost of international politics at some level, because actually war and politics are inextricably tied. To like say that one is beyond the pale and the other is tamed war, and therefore we must I think it's. I know you're not making these maximal claims.
I think it's
but ultimately at the limit, that's what we're talking about.
I think it should be a perfectly easy thing to say that all other things being equal, it's better for innocent civilians to not be killed.
I don't know what innocent is. Civilians being killed. Yes, I mean, I suppose, but again, as we discussed with Sam Moyne, I think like a lot of stuff can get easily hidden in that as well. This idea of that the sole good and sole purpose of policy should be to minimize civilian casualties. There's many different ways to moralize about war.
So what is the point of policy?
Well, I don't know. It's figure out what you're going to do as a country, basically. I don't think.
But how can you figure out what you're going to do if you don't have preferred outcomes?
I would say your preferred outcome is a Palestinian state, and you are horrified that the United States is, there's a lot of collateral damage with our weapons.
What's your preferred outcome?
I don't have a preferred outcome there. None.
There's
Zero.
nothing. So you can't tell me that you have any preference about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can't state to me any kind of preference among all the available options.
No. I'm 100% honest with you there.
So you can't even tell me, like, what about between a two-state solution or a one-state solution? Presumably you have a preference there.
I would point out that the one-state solution didn't work in Bosnia. I've always pointed that out.
Yeah, so that you prefer a two-state solution.
I don't know, prefer is a very strong thing. Like it's kind of like everything else. It's I think I said this previously about like some of Trump's outrageous like tariff policies and the rest of that. It's incredible, absolutely incredible to see these things attempted and tried. Seems like a bad idea to me, but I'm not the president. Is really what it comes down to.
Okay, but you do, all other things being equal, you'd prefer these tariffs not be implemented. That's what it sounds like to me.
I am already thinking in terms of let's reframe this discussion and think about what Trump seems to be achieving, even despite what he is claiming to do one way or the other.
But what's the point of analysis if we can't get a better understanding of what is preferable and what's not preferable? I just don't understand what the point.
Well, because you're trapped then in like this kind of like I think ossified stance. What Trump has now achieved or looks to be achieving is that he's creating a 10% baseline federal sales tax on consumers that will bring in whatever amount of money that is on foreign goods. And it's a stream of money, and he's done this without actually passing any new tax laws in Congress. That's an interesting way to look at what he's done right now. Now, we can say like, oh, well, we know a lot about free trade, and this will make us all poorer, and the rest of that. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I was educated in that world, but you know what?
But
like,
presumably you prefer that America's GDP growth it continues and increases. That would be, I assume, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Maybe.
Do you want the American economy to grow?
If you frame it in terms of taxation, I mean, Republicans would say to you that taxation is what also, limits growth, and we have to lower taxes and all the rest of that. Obviously, that's incompatible with other things like staying an actual superpower in the world with power. Like, this shit needs to be financed somehow. We've been grotesquely underfinancing it. And so, there's a trade-off there about like what the government takes. Trump is, I don't know, like bumbled into a permanent, probably permanent sales tax increase on Americans. We can call it like, this is the improper way to do that, maybe as a more proper way. It's striking that it's not done through Congress, through like a normal legislative process, that we've, again, backed into this. It's interesting what we backed into. I don't know if it's good. I have no fucking idea. I'd prefer a powerful America. I don't know. I'm not convinced
Why
at this
do you
point.
prefer a powerful?
Because I live here. Because I live here. That's it.
But so if you happen to live...
Right. If I wasn't an American, I'd be
No.
anti-American.
Not that you weren't American, but let's say you didn't live in America, but you were still an American.
Oh, well, okay, whatever. I'm an American, so I'm for American power.
Why?
That's it.
Why?
Because I'm an American. That's it. It doesn't go
So
any
just
further. I don't think
tribalism,
because
it's blind
America's good.
loyalty.
I have never said, I've never like been pro-American because America is just or good. Never.
But presumably,
and I would never
you think
then say that
America's better than the available alternatives. Presumably.
I mean, again, I don't know. The better part is challenging. I think it does better. It's world beating. It's what we've always discussed.
Okay.
Like ultimately,
So for
it's
you,
not
it's
that
just a blind loyalty. It's because you happen to be an American citizen.
Yeah,
so therefore,
I think that's
there's
right.
nothing more to it to you.
I think that's right.
it.
Yeah.
But what explain that? What about being an American citizen requires there's still a gap from A to B there that I think you're not really explaining. Just because there's a lot of American citizens who don't necessarily think that America should be powerful or the most powerful. Why do you think?
I'm puzzled by these people, but
Okay,
they're my
but why do
fellow
you
countrymen.
think America should be
Huh?
the most powerful nation? Why?
Because otherwise you're doing dumb shit like having 5% of your population killed and appealing to international justice.
But why does it matter if they're being killed?
It's important to be able to give as well as as get.
Okay,
that
but
is to
why
say.
does it matter if 5% of Americans are killed? Why is that so important to you? You just said that's not really a primary concern of yours.
No,
people
it's
being killed.
The existence of whatever my tribe is the main concern is what it comes down to. Huh?
Why?
I don't know. I mean, like, and what's your answer? What is the main thing? Why are you so? What is like human life beyond your neighbor? Like, why is this universal thing? Is it some sort of moral claim? Like, are you called by God to save humanity? Is that it? Is that the calling of all of us?
Because I think that
to redeem
less
the world?
people being killed is better than more people being killed. There's nothing about some grand salvation plan here. I'm saying something rather minimal. When we have the chance, we should prevent mass killing of people because people dying is bad. It's a measurably bad outcome, and it affects lives by definition. And if we can have more lives that are better, and we can actually have more lives that are alive, that seems a reasonable thing to want. But yeah, I mean, but yes,
That it's the highest priority, I guess, is the question. It should be the highest priority in any policy decision. That basically it should outweigh everything else.
No. I mean, I think it depends on what the different considerations are and different things. If you're a U.S. policymaker, you're not a human rights organization. You can take. I think you should take human rights considerations into account.
Right.
But they can't be the sole judge or measure of what you do or don't do. I mean, we have I've always said this. America is not a human. I mean, it should promote human rights in certain situations, and it should
situations,
and it should matter. It should matter in all situations. But it can't always be the number one consideration because there are other interests that are implicated, and America is a vast empire.
When should it matter, and when shouldn't it matter?
I think it should always matter to some extent. It should always be factored in.
Or should always be debated, but when should it take precedence?
It depends on each individual case. It's hard for me to say in the abstract.
Okay, I mean, it doesn't sound like you're that different from where I'm coming at this.
No, trust me, Damir, I'm different.
I don't think you are. I think you're an activist. That's how you're different. But you still claim
there we go
that. But you
again
still
with that term.
No, but I mean, I think it's true because this is exactly. As soon as you fall into policy world, you're not that different from me. But then you fall back into moral.
I think
world,
American power
which
should
is lives
be used
matter.
I think American power should be used to prevent the loss of life where possible. But I'm not going to pretend...
I mean, that where possible does like a whole lot
well,
of...
because it's not possible for the U.S. to stop every incident of mass killing everywhere in the world. That's just simply not in America's remit. And we don't have the capability to do that everywhere. But we do have the ability to do it somewhere.
That it should be like actually... because it's not, right? Like, I think you agree, and this is a great frustration of yours, that it's not actually... We don't have a preventing deaths in the world cabinet secretary that is always sitting there being like, oh, but sir, we need to prevent death here, and have we considered the death thing? Because actually that's not how policy works.
Well, we do have departments that are specifically concerned with human rights and democracy. I mean, they've been dismantled
at some point. I don't know if they
somewhat.
exist anymore.
But I mean, those concerns have been integrated in various levels of policy making.
Lower levels.
There was even a national security director for democracy or something to that effect. I mean, there's been efforts to integrate that.
Yeah, efforts, right. And so in your ideal world, that would be, actually there'd be someone at the table saying always that this is a thing, and it's not the case, right? Like in the policy world,
there is
it's
usually
at lower
someone
levels
on the
and it bubbles up.
Who offers up that perspective. I mean, it happens to be the case that they're often shot down.
Yeah.
But under Trump, there may not even be that person at the table.
Correct.
Almost certainly there isn't that person
and
at
again,
the
I
table
find
any longer.
this is why I find Trump so interesting, is that, I think you're going to arrive at...
Because he wants to stop conflict. And that is I mean, he wants a Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
So if he can just stop things from happening, even if the terms of the deal aren't that great. I mean, people will say the U.S. Houthi truce in Yemen, that it wasn't great for the U.S. or U.S. interests. I don't think Trump really cares about the fine print. He just wants an end to attacks and killing and the use of military force in this particular context. That's what he wants. He just wants
it's so interesting to me what that deal actually entails and how it holds up. I mean, at the current moment, it just looks like Trump let Waltz try and use air power to win and saw that it wasn't working and then just walked the fuck away. I mean, that's a different part, is that he can just walk away and doesn't give a fuck. That's like a superpower of his. Again, amoral and spectacular to behold. But yeah, I mean, again, I guess,
go ahead.
I guess it just comes back to this is that I'm not even a policymaker. I've never been in government. I am, intrigued in.
But you've worked at a policy think tank. You've worked
Yeah,
at
I
a
did.
policy
Sure.
think tank.
I mean, look at the kind of stuff that I was writing there. Basically, it was. I mean, we did work on trying to cobble together, some sort of alternative to European bumbling in the Balkans. But a lot of the stuff I wrote was just sort of, I don't know, pointing out how foolish and idealistic the Europeans are in this, and unable to approach things in a much sort of grittier and nastier, and quite frankly, dealing with nasty regimes as partners rather than as pariahs. Yeah, I mean, that is what I did at the think tank, which is like, let's see what can be done and not worry about the best thing that should be done.
So you do want things to be done.
It's very complicated how I ended up basically at these positions, largely that were dictated by, levels higher up of like what line I should be defending. But, I could write myself into a defense of a certain kind of policy.
Oh,
sure.
So now you're saying you didn't really believe in the things that you were
I will say that, I mean, and I said it before, I found it very challenging, as a Croat, working with, like the legacy of the wars there, and yet like coming up with very, creative ways to try and bring Serbia, which has not come to terms with, history in a lot of this stuff. So on a personal level, I was conflicted. On the professional level, I was all in and trying to sort of make this stuff work. Didn't work in the end. It was interesting. And quite frankly, it was fascinating 2.5, 3 years of my life actually interacting with people on that level. People who, again, are far,
what do you
far
want your
from
legacy
paragons.
to be? What do you want your legacy to be?
I don't care.
How do you want to be
do not care.
remembered when you die?
I don't care. Like, I'll be dead. I really do not care.
But presumably some people will still read your writing and listen to some of your podcasts, inevitably.
I've said this before. It's not why I write. Like, I
understand, but I get it. That's not why you write. But people will read what you've written. Maybe not huge numbers. I don't know.
I think of it as like a slug trail I leave behind myself.
But what do you want them to get out of your writing? Let's say someone goes back and what do you
No. It's Shadi. Basically, it's anytime I write something. Sometimes it's because there's a deadline and needs to be written, but it's and I've committed to write like a Tuesday note every X number of weeks. So I really do think of it as like snapshots in time of like where my head is at. It really is that. There's no like bigger project. Never has been a bigger project. I'm always just trying to sort of work this stuff out. It's pretty solipsistic, actually.
When you say solipsistic, what do you mean exactly?
I don't care about the reader. I'm just working shit out in my head. I just really could not care less.
So you're trying to tell me that you're indifferent to what the reader takes from your writing?
I'm not going to say that I don't like people like reading it and then reacting to it. I think that's interesting, and then I learn stuff from it, and I communicate. I'm not like fully autistic and sociopathic, psychopathic that like the world doesn't exist. I admit that the world exists, but when I'm writing, I'm not writing for my legacy and to change the world.
I know you're not writing for
not.
it, but I'm just saying that. What do you want people to get out of your writing?
I think what I'm trying to do as best I can at any one point is be honest. And so, quite frankly, it's interesting sometimes for me to read my own stuff, which I never do, to figure out where I was at any one point.
But why? But why is that so important to you or so interesting? Why do you? What's this value of honesty that you've now introduced at the very end here?
I don't know. I'm not saying it's a value of honesty. I'm saying I'm just trying to figure out like what I think about any one thing at any one time.
Why is that important? Why is that relevant? Why does it matter?
Not to change the world, Shadi. To figure out what's going on in my head. Basically, is what it comes down to. That's like what's going on in my head at any one point.
But why do you feel you have to share that with the world?
I don't know. It's like it's how I make my money. There's the only way.
So it's a job.
I need to put food in my mouth.
Okay, so that's really what it comes down to for you? That it's a job?
I don't know. It's fun to do. It's fun to write. I like writing.
It's fun.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, am I like, but again, no, do you think I'm trying to change the world with my writing?
No.
Do you think like I have like
Obviously you're not.
a vision
You've been
and a goal?
saying that for a while now. And you said that, I guess, for years in one way or another, that you don't want to change the world.
Yeah, and this is horrifying.
No,
Or
I didn't say it's
puzzling.
horrifying. I think
I'm
that you're
lying.
not. I wonder if you're being fully honest about what's going on, or you don't want to face that you do actually have preferences.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway,
I guess we're at that point of the conversation again, which we've mined many ways, but it's okay. It's a good
no,
thing
I do
to
think
return
that we
to.
got to certain things that we haven't really gotten to before, and we were really able to like dig a bit deeper.
Yeah.
For both of us, actually. I think in a way that it was actually pretty useful.
Yeah, good times.
Indeed. Okay.
All right, my friend.
That was a roller coaster. I guess
Roller
we got to
coaster.
the end of the ride.
Yeah, good thing we survived. It didn't
survived.
wreck. All right, man.
Okay, Damir. Talk to you later. Bye.